Just start recording. So today we have another conversation with Frank, and we're supposed to talk about axiology, the theory of value, dive deeper into one of these philosophical branches. And well, Frank, what's your definition of value, of ethics?
My definition of value, which I have behind me, I don't think anybody can read it because how small, but it's just going to say the practice of holding, recognizing a subject and or object as regarding, having or regarding worth. So that's it.
Is worth not the same word as like value?
Yeah, it's a little bit synonymous. I go a little bit more into detail. It could be worth, usefulness. There's a bunch of synonymous.
Importance, usefulness, yeah.
Yeah, but I can go into a little bit. I then go, can be assumed, example, F of A. So this is me trying to, just explain how you would present value logically in predicate logic. This is just to say F is a given predicate, A is a given name. F could be any type of quality. We were talking about art last time, and I said, I think that picture is good, right? So the picture is the subject, good is the predicate. I'm just saying it can be assumed. I can just say it. And then it can also be in regards to having subjects in regards to other subjects or objects. So this right here, I'm doing the logical expression of what's known as transitivity, which is to say it is the case that A is more F than B, and B is more F than C, then it is the case that A is more F than C. Okay, greater than or less than that. Okay, in value. So it's just expressing a way that after we ascribe value to things, we then hold that value in a consistent manner to those things as we represent it. If I say my phone is better than my coffee mug, right? And my coffee mug is better than my lamp, then it ought to follow that my phone is better than my lamp. That would be the expression. So these are just kind of explanations of how we do it, because I understand my definition kind of with worth falls back into it. It was really hard. I tried to do it without falling back into it.
I made a very simple definition, something that makes one thing better than the other of the same category. Yeah, and I guess the same category here is kind of keyword.
Category would be, you asked about, it's one of your questions. I don't know if you want to get to it right away.
Yeah, sure. Let me go there.
So I would state, you had a question, can we categorize value? And I would say, yes, we can. And I think I just showed why, yes, we can, because anything that we can ascribe a predicate or quality to in relationship to one thing in relationship to another thing, that they share that predicate or quality, okay, then I can categorize that thing. It's like to say, both this cup and this phone both have the quality of being objects. So they can both be categorized as objects in the set of objects, and they can have that in relationship to each other. So I can do the same thing with my thoughts. Just abstract thoughts that I have, like I could write up on the board, but 1 and 2 both have the quality of being natural numbers. I can categorize those as being, both in the set of natural numbers. Now, I would say categories deal more with observations than just abstractions. So that second one, maybe not so much. I wouldn't say that's categorized by that definition, but the cup and the phone one being objects, I would say that's, yes, we can categorize it. And as I can ascribe value to these things, both of these have the quality of being good, categorized as both being in the set of good. Yes, I can do it. So
suppose that you have certain thoughts, for example, and you evaluate these thoughts, and then you evaluate certain objects. Can we say that evaluation, like, can we compare thoughts and objects in terms of evaluating them?
We can compare our thoughts to our objects and value of them. It's more so being consistent with our thoughts as we apply them to the object, okay? My thought of a coffee cup or mug and an actual coffee cup or mug. So the thing is, I could think, we went over this where someone has the thought of, I like coffee.
Mhm.
They drink coffee, and that's a test. They then get a validation of, yeah, I do like coffee, that experience of coffee. But I could also at the same time say, I like coffee. Oh, and come to the conclusion, falsify that, oh no, my subjective idea of likeness of coffee was wrong. So they do have relations, but it's not like a one-to-one relation. It's a very contingent relation. It's possibly true.
Yeah, but
So
how about comparing certain, like, for example, once again, we have objects and we have things, we may say some virtues, for example, or pleasure. And can we say that our, like, whatever, quality of being kind is more valuable than having certain object?
okay. That goes back into the area of transitivity. I can say A, which is kindness, is more valuable than, let's say, meanness, all right? But then I need to be able to show that is the case for all instances over thing. And that's the first problem right there, if we're going to have objects. So I don't know, you wouldn't be able to see if I wrote it up here. There's a rule that's basically called quantitative negation in predicate logic. And this is very important when we deal with observations versus when we deal with assumptions. Observations are objective, assumptions are subjective. Not always, but it's more so in that case. Basically, whenever I make an observation, if I say, this observation is the case for all instances, validating it for all, I'm left with a problem that if someone uses the inference known as quantitative negation, I am simultaneously saying that there doesn't exist a thing that doesn't, that is the thing I saw or observed that doesn't have the quality that I just said. A good example of this is if you ever got in a fight with a family member or significant other about washing the dishes. And someone looks up and they go, you never wash the dishes. And the way you reply or refute them is usually you point out one instance where you did indeed wash the dishes. Ergo, their assertion that it's never the case that you wash the dishes is null. Because you did it one time.
Yeah, which usually implies not that you'd never would, but it's just an expression.
Yeah, they don't get me wrong. If you make this, you're probably going to be sleeping on the couch or in trouble. But that is a valid inference if we're talking purely logically. And the thing that I'm saying is, if someone says, I always wash the dishes, and what they're simultaneously saying is they wash the dishes for all instances, and there cannot exist another instance where someone else washes the dishes. That's what they're saying at the same time, not a singular instance.
It's very hard to avoid such language. Like sometimes we all do say that, I always do this or I never do that.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue where it's very easy to talk in that kind of, grandiose and almost dogmatic way. The thing is, with value here, though, you can kind of see it when I say, for all instances, kindness is better than meanness. If I can point out one instance where meanness overtakes kindness because of circumstance or for some other reason, kindness might be naive, your theory falls flat. I just disproved it. I just did it in a logical instance. An instance where I could disprove this, if I wanted to use like an example, we could look at like Game of Thrones, if you ever watched that show.
Yeah, I've watched actually. Probably a couple of times. So.
or if you just want to be historic, we can talk about classic Machiavellianism, because that's really all that show is. Is the idea that, someone say kindness is always better, but we could look at the practice of being a ruler and how many kind rulers were overtaken by mean people because their kindness didn't allow them to deal with some of the aspects of being a ruler. You know, this was going way back. That'd be historical. We could also apply it to the fiction, but we just need to glean the values from it to separate from fiction and reality. So we have both of those. I don't know.
Does it mean that there's no like it all must be contextualized, right? So when we talk about values and when we talk about what thing is like holds an objective value, we have to put it in the context.
If we want it to be, it doesn't have to be, but if we want it to be like meaningful and, you know, consistent, what I'm doing over here with logic, yeah, you kind of have to. It's very important because otherwise you're being ambiguous. You're just saying things for the fact to say. Remember when we were talking about how people think? There's almost a more behavioralistic, simple thinking, slow thinking, and then there's a more rigorous. Well, this is me trying to make it rigorous and being like, yeah, you do need to contextualize it if we're going to understand it, versus just, you know, blurting out the, you know, an almost reflexive response.
What is your second definition there? Morality?
This is morality. One sub definition of one. So that just means it follows from this first definition. And it is the practice of subjective value, rational. And that's just notating that it comes from the area.
The practice of subjective value.
Yes. Ethics is underneath it. Second sub-definition of one, and that's the practice of objective value, empirical. So I'm just differentiating these two things, like we did in our last conversation, where I mean two very different things when I'm talking about morality versus when I'm talking about ethics.
So morality is a kind of ethical subjectivism, and ethics it's
I brought it up a little bit. It's where we imply morality from watching actions of rational beings. We kind of look at them. I get at that down here where I build a premise where I basically say, in all cases, we can imply morality from ethics, the modus ponens, and can state if there is not morality, then there is not ethics, modus tollens, off of the premise, if ethics, then morality. So that's a real fancy way of saying, whenever we say there's ethics, we can infer there's also morality, okay? And where we can say there's not morality, we can also infer there is not ethics, okay? So,
but does morality imply ethics?
Morality, the way you would say this is you would say morality necessitates ethics. This is called the necessity and an implication, and this is called the sufficient, also known as a consequence and an antecedent. I don't know if you can see it, but if you think of it as circles, okay, morality is a big circle, okay? Inside it is the smaller circle of ethics, okay? So whenever I'm talking about ethics, which is inside the morality system, I'm also talking about morality. But I can talk about morality or practice morality, not talk about practice morality without dealing with ethics. It's possible for it to go without it. So
ethics is what we agree on when we deal with each other, like in a society.
I would say, okay, that's another construct that I didn't actually write up here. I have a bunch I need to get into before it. That's justice to me. That's another.
Yeah, but it's like morality. Basically, it's values which I have, right?
Yep. And I assume
ethics,
I can do.
Ethics, it's those values which I have, which I share with other people who also have the same values.
I would define them here. I would say ethics are my actions as consequences of that morality, or as I view other people who I see as possible moral beings. Their actions are the same, are the consequence of morality, or we imply it in these cases. What you're talking about, where we start agreeing upon things, like we start agreeing upon, you know, we're going to follow this code, we're going to follow these virtues, or we're going to do this together, not necessarily because we all agree upon them, but we want to know what the other person's going to do. We can be consistent with one another interactions. That's getting towards justice. That's social contract to where I go in, where we start making laws or stuff like that, where we say, this doesn't necessarily reflect my morality or your morality or your morality. It kind of gives us a kind of meta morality, the idea that it kind of approximates like all of us and allows us to kind of act in a way that I can expect you to act in a certain way, you know, and be consistent with your actions. It's more trust-based, which is a consequence of morality and ethics. Don't get me wrong. It definitely has to do with them. But I think if we conflate them all together, we get, that's a case where things, when we try to conflate them together, they get more ambiguous and our understanding gets more murky. And I want to keep it as clear as possible. So that I don't have that down here, but that'd be kind of how I differentiate those things.
Okay. So we have in philosophy, we have these branches like normative ethics, which is also prescriptive ethics. Then we have meta ethics, applied ethics, and descriptive ethics. Can we talk a little bit on that?
Yeah. So which one do you want to start with?
Well, let's start from normative ethics.
Just starting from top. Okay. So when we're dealing with normative ethics, the idea, you remember in our last talk, I brought up precision and accuracy. Remember that I brought up those two tools? The idea, okay.
No. You may tell it once again. Probably I'll remember now.
Okay. So precision is a grouping of data points. Okay. The fact that I can be consistently grouping. It also has to do with logic. Logicians are trying to be consistent, precise, and representing things properly over and over and over again. That's what logicians are trying to do. Accuracy, on the other hand, deals with trying to properly and objectively represent something. It could be once, twice, the amount of times you do it doesn't matter. It's just that you are able to do it. A good example of this would be if I have a dartboard on the wall and I'm throwing darts at it. I'm not saying, you know, where I'm trying to hit or anything. I could be not even hitting the dartboard. I could be hitting the wall. And if I get, but if those darts group together in a nice tight group, I'm precise. You can say that. Now, if I wanted to be accurate, on the other hand, I would have one dart. And I'd say, before I threw that dart, I would say, I'm going to hit the bullseye. I would call out what I'm going to hit, what I'm going to do. And I'd throw it, and I hit the bullseye just once. I'd be accurate at that point. I won't be precise because I don't have a grouping. So key thing about differentiating between these two is normative ethics deals a lot with precision, with the idea that I have, you know, a bell curve. I have a grouping of ethical actions that seem to be, you know, what we call the norm. The idea that most people are doing it through observations, okay? And the thing that I look at with that is in many ways how liberal justice system kind of forms their laws, which I'm cool with it, but the detachment that usually comes from this is the ethic to moral attachment that I described here, because the ethic to moral attachment that I described doesn't need precision. Well, it kind of does if you're going to be authentic. That's another thing that will come up here, but it needs accuracy. You know, I need to have the coffee cup make the hypothesis prior that I like coffee and have the possibility of failing, just like I could have the possibility of not hitting that bullseye. That's the thing I need to connect my morality to my ethic. And another problem with it would also be the idea that it's known as, it's a fallacy known as ad populum. You might also know it as a bandwagon fallacy. The idea that because most people say it's right,
you appeal to the most,
it's right. Yeah, and you know, we can look historically and say, no, that's actually wrong all the fucking time. You know, but it's, to me, normative ethics is fine. It has a place in the justice area, but when it comes down to connecting to morality, it has a huge disconnect. And I usually will point that out And the same argument, by the way, that I'm putting here can go for utilitarianism, contractarianism, and consequentialism. In the area that you have a moral disconnect from your observed instances because of a heavy emphasis on quantitative ends, on your observed ends.
Can you define like libertarianism, consequentialism?
Yeah. So utilitarianism, Bentham, the classic statements, you do the actions that result in the most good.
For
okay.
The world,
usually they do a pain and pleasure model, something like that. Or it's quantitative. You want it to result in the most good. Usually they won't.
Yeah, but the most good for you, or the most good for the whole universe.
That's the disconnect of the moral area that I'm bringing up. Where I go, okay, the most good for who? Who's the morality that's recognizing the good? I'll skip ahead because I'm saying the same. I'm saying that for all three of these. Contractarianism. If you heard what I just said about the justice area and people agreeing upon things,
it's like Rousseau, basically. The theory of social contrast.
Yeah, where we're all sitting around going like, this doesn't exactly align with my morality. That's the area that I'm pointing, but I know how you're going to act. I have some feeling that I can act in the sphere in some area of trust. I'm substituting trust for moral authenticity is what I'm really doing. So, and then consequentialism, which has the same problem as utilitarianism, where utilitarianism usually isn't super pragmatic in the sense, pragmatic meaning the ends justify the means, classic pragmatism. And the fact that utilitarianism will still consider like the means of usually getting to that quantitative end. Whereas consequentialism almost is entirely classically pragmatic in the fact that, no, all that matters is the result. This isn't the case for all practitioners of consequentialism, but the main point that I'm making here is, once again, as it has that same emphasis on the ends, getting the most good, it has a moral disconnect for who is the most good for, who's designating this stuff. Good for both utilitarianism and consequentialism. I could come up with a analogy where I would say, okay, you're a skilled engineer or technician, and you have two boats that are sinking, and there's 100 people on one boat, and there's 150 people on the other boat, and you only have time to save one. Which one do you save? And the thing is, everyone's gonna, think it's so easy to be like 150. That's the classic, I can save the most people. But the thing about simplifying it to that level, I look and I go, but what if this is kind of a trolley problem? What if of that 100 people, more of them are academics and people that are gonna, try to help the world, whereas that 150, is like mostly laity or maybe convicts or something like that. And then you go, oh, well, it starts blurring it, and I can get even more blurry where I can say, and this one has more women and children, and this one has, more men on it. And it really just goes to show that the idea of separating morality from these ethical consequences is just absurd. I look at it and I go, you can't do that. It wouldn't be value. It wouldn't be, a proper expression. Because ultimately that is what we're trying to get at with the study of value. Oh, I went off on a tangent there. Ooh. What were we talking about? Normative ethics.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, the normative ethics of ad populum and those ethical practices, you can kind of see the disconnect there, as well as, when we say for the most people, that same thing, the ship problem. Also, it also has the problem usually that it disregards outlying data points. It's known in philosophical community as cherry picking fallacy, where you disregard whatever doesn't support your initial thesis or argument. So that would be another problem that they have. A lot of it is just moral disconnect. So that would be my take on it. What was the next one? That was on the list?
It was applied, not meta ethics.
Meta ethics.
Yeah. How do we know what's right and wrong in the first place?
I mean, metaethics, the way that we know what's right and wrong is, I would come back, I would say it depends on who you ask. You could have the classical argument of Euthyphro, the Platonic dialogue, where somebody goes, we know what's right and wrong because what is right is virtuous because the gods decree it so. And then, Plato's Socrates would reply with, well, who are you to know what the gods freaking decree is so and not so? Or
And
you
then
can
we
have
have all political systems where we may say like government creates laws, and these laws are right. If
Go ahead. So, okay, you can have political systems that create laws, but the thing is, I ultimately go like, ethics are right. This is my take. They're right because they're rational beings who have moralities that ethics, align with. That was the huge thing about me getting to the connection with everything, because we're rational beings that have morals. We have values that we try to express through our ethical, our actions. And if a government mirrors those actions, I would call this a liberal idea of a government. At that point, I would say the government, by consequence, is right, or the society as they mirrors. Benjamin Franklin put it best, where he said, America is great because America is good. This could be applied to any freaking country. Once it ceases being good, it will cease to be great, is what he basically said. And I could apply that to the idea of any type of meta society, government, tribe, or anything. When it stops reflecting the morality in the meta or the government areas or community, it is no longer good, because if not morality, not value. That would be off my definitions.
Yeah, but what if there's different social classes in one society? It reflects the value of one class and doesn't reflect the values of the other class. Okay, we get it. Consciousness.
I have consciousness at the top. We got into this in the last conversation. Consciousness to me is just basically the ability, I am a rational being. I am being, okay? And I brought up how we categorize.
Are you still Frank?
Yes, I'm Frank.
I was thinking about this question and I came up with something like, what if I change my name? Like, remember last time we discussed it? Like, okay,
then you're whatever. Then you're what. The thing is,
what's going on with an identity if you change your name?
I love identity. And so the actual name doesn't matter to who you are. If I say I'm Frank, if I say I'm Lex Luthor, if I say I'm Superman, whatever, it doesn't matter. In all cases, all it is it's a reducible expression.
Like symbol.
Yep, it's a placeholder. It's a synonymous expression back down to me just saying that can be reduced. I have to note this. In logic, you probably know this sign, this symbol, but in mathematical logic, we have an operator that we literally call the identity operator. We literally, it's how you rigorously express identity. And I guarantee you and everyone watching this has used this operator and didn't know this was the operator. It is literally that, the equivalent sign.
Yeah.
That is it. And we have expressions and laws going off of this operator. Like if x equals y, if I'm going to say that x is identical to y, one of the laws that I can use is Leibniz's law, which I used for the mind-body problem, the mind and brain problem in our last conversation. When I say mind and brain are the same thing, they're identical, they're the same thing, I shouldn't be able to identify one thing about one that isn't true about the other. I shouldn't be able to differentiate between them qualities. And I use pain in that last one. But what I'm basically saying is when we make the expression, I am Frank, there exists X that, I have an open formula, there exists X, and all I'm using a law called existential instantiation. to make EX into A, just A. And A is Frank. It's a name. It's an identity. The thing is, existential instantiation.
I actually can see it because there's light and it reflects.
God damn it. Okay. Existential instantiation.
Oh, now it works. Yeah, now it works. Yeah, good.
Okay, existential instantiation can be used on literally anything that that variable is on. The only thing that matters is that we say there exists X. So you or me, when I declare the name is just a placeholder for that constant variable.
Or
that
X.
is saying X.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
I've been writing. Oh. I've been writing my journals since 2008, and recently, 5 years ago, I started publishing them, and I replaced all names with just one X. Like not my names, but all people whom I mentioned there.
Okay.
So, there was lots of names.
So you wouldn't have any particularity. You would notice, you'd be like, oh, who am I talking about here? Or what am I talking about?
Yeah, but I can understand. I still can understand it because I have my written journals, but I published them and
okay.
On the internet, there's just one X. So whenever I interact with somebody, it's just X, and nobody actually can guess who is it. Only I can see if I just look up to my journals.
Okay. I mean, that's kind of, I'm not saying all names are, okay, I'm saying they're all reducible down to X, X, Y, Z, that variable. But the thing is, the way that we give particularity to things, that we recognize a proper noun, a name, those things, we recognize a particular thing, is that we use that law of inference, the existential instantiation, to move to A. We give it a proper name. That thing, so we can designate a singular thing or a group to go, and say that is it. God, I got off topic.
So we were social classes, yeah, in one,
yeah,
in one society,
social classes. I flipped the board because this has consciousness. The big thing that we need to look at with social classes is the idea of personhood. Seeing other people as ends in themselves. If you remember this, I got at with the second formula. Yep, ends in themselves that have their own morality. And the concept that's not up here, that's really big for this working with like social classes or in societies, is a concept called tolerance. You probably heard it from other philosophers, which is just to say, you understand that, living in a society with everyone else being an ends in themselves, able to exert their own morality, you're going to have values that butt heads, that kind of don't always get along. And classes, not even just from single people, but entire, cultures next to each other. And it's kind of learning that if this is an eventuality, we kind of have to be somewhat detached in areas and just be like, let them go do their thing, we'll do our thing. Okay, it's an eventuality, and we're going to just, keep getting along. This also gets into trust and game theory, because we have a collective goal of continuing as a society. We want the most good out of it. We need to kind of just learn to live and let others, kind of live their own morals and live our morals. There are exceptions to this. I should point that out. If someone exerts a morality that is hostile, intolerant to others' morality, this would be, if one social class is morality through their actions, their ethics is like, we're going to kill every other member of this social class. You can't ask the social class they're going to kill to sit there and tolerate it at that point. Because if they tolerate it, it literally ends in their death. They won't be ends in themselves. Their morality literally is to deny another ends in themselves, another being's ability. They need to be alive to express morality. They need to have the ability to express morality, which means they need to be alive. So in those cases,
it reminds me of the paradox of tolerance, right? So if everybody is tolerant, then the group which is intolerant will basically take over.
It's called Popper's paradox of tolerance, and it's, if you are tolerant of intolerance, you are thereby spreading intolerance by being tolerant is the paradox. And he was talking specifically about violent crimes. That's the biggest one where this comes up. And I'm kind of showing that mainly if being tolerant of another value literally denies the ends in themselves of other people by being tolerant of them, then I would say, no, you don't have to tolerate them. That's fucking ridiculous. No one can ask, a person to give up their life to allow another person to express their values. So that would be kind of that area dealing with social classes and meta ethics. Was there anything else you wanted to get into in meta ethics, or do you want to keep moving down?
Well, I want to better understand how it works. Like how who decides what's right and what's wrong? Like, is it ultimately a government? Is it like rational? Like by rationality, again, we mean 10,000 different things, right? So you say I am a rational being. You say you're a rational being, then we start arguing about what's right and wrong, and we see that we completely disagree on like 50, 80, 60% of what's going on. Yeah, I like from my perspective, I see it more like if I interact with people and they have certain, let's say, values which I do not share, and they contradict so that we can interact. I basically don't interact with people, so I don't like if there's disagreement. So I mean, sometimes you just you, for example, have to participate in certain conversations, or you have to deal with certain people, and they basically as you said, they let's say they are intolerant towards everything. The best way for me, as I see it, it's basically to avoid all interactions. And it's very close to social values too, because there are lots of social values, for example, which I do not share in my environment, and still I can interact with like with people, even though I do not share their social values. But I do it kind of in a special way. So I try to avoid all domains where we may just disagree on certain values. It's very opaque. I can't express it clearly.
It's okay. No, I get having lived in this world and interacted with people, I know firsthand there are people that I've interacted that at some point I'm like, this is a sunken cost fallacy. This is a lost cause. I'm putting a bunch of effort into something that frankly we're not going to reconcile our values. We're just not. It's not going to happen.
I changed more than three social circles during my life, like a huge big social circle. Basically, you just you can't interact with few people, and then you have to just get rid of the entire social circle, because there are a few people with whom you just basically,
Oh yeah, trust me, I've done the same thing. It's I don't want to say it's the case for every person off of my own dictum for observations, but the thing is I've noticed it quite a few times with people getting older, and I do think it's a common thing that exists with people getting older, and it has to do with us testing our values, coming out. And your question was who creates values, and I think this conflict, this constant conflict and tension that we see in changing, and that we see it happening so often, and the fact that values seem almost to pop out of everywhere, even for so differently for people who are in proximity of one another, like live in same social circle, same social circles or same state, or the same environmental conditions, tells me, I look at that and I go, value comes from, this is back to my morality, value comes from us. Every single person can come up with their own value. This explains why there's always kind of this this need for tolerance and tension. Not always tolerance. There are cases where tolerance can go out the window, but it's kind of why you need to understand that the idea we can have some cohesion in meta ethics or government or justice systems, but ultimately those government systems or the analysis of a meta-analysis is just indicative of the groups the groups or the approximation of the group's morals. It isn't their actual morals. People can differ quite a bit inside that sphere.
And
So
they
to me, it's from us. That's what I'm saying.
And they're changing. And they're like, are they changing with time, or we may come up with...
I can dictate cases where people have changed with time, and I can dictate cases where people haven't changed with time. Both, I can.
Yeah, when we discuss meta ethics, what, like there are certain positions like moral objectivism, moral skepticism, ethical subjectivism.
Yep.
Like, what is the position that appeals to you the most?
To me, I mean, regarding morality, it isn't. I'm actually on the area that the place where skepticism fails is anything that can be considered metaphysical or really just pure subjective, okay, and abstract. And off my definitions of morality, you may realize that I am saying that skepticism fails in morality. I am saying that. That being said, it's great for ethics or observations. And anytime you do anything empirical, you should also be skeptical. But regarding morality, the position I would take more so in this would be an idea. It's just an idealistic morality. It's pretty much a morality that reflects the mind and is trying constantly to re-engage it and find out its own truth. Is the only idea I'm getting at. So I don't think morality, because I am an absolute idealist, morality isn't out there, value isn't out there. In all cases, the only thing I can say, similar to when I was talking about a lens with idealism, in all cases, as I understand things, I'm just saying there is a rationale. The same is true of value. So
so it's then it's going to be something like ethical subjectivism, right?
Yes. Ultimately, the ethics would be indicative of the subjective. So that's where it would be. That helps you understand.
It's actually, yesterday I took some definitions from Wikipedia. So it's the meta-ethical view which claims that ethical sentences express proposition. Some such propositions are true. The truth or falsity of such propositions is necessary, dependent on the attitude of people.
Yep, that would be it.
Yeah, there's...
That's it to a T. So,
okay.
Do you want me to clarify that, or do you got it? Like,
yeah, I guess I got it. Yeah.
Okay, then we're good. Never mind.
It's quite simple. I guess it's I would consider myself as an ethical subjectivist too.
Yep.
But I also, I still incline towards moral skepticism, because sometimes, I see that there's certain values which I have right now. For example, I know that probably I'm wrong, and I know that in 5-10 years, as time progresses, I may just change these values, and I can't hold to the same values, because I remember many times when I believed in one thing, thought this is the most valuable thing, this is what I have to do, it's what makes me happy, and then I changed it, and then I changed it again, and then I changed it again.
No, I totally agree with that. The area that the skepticism, I say morality is subjective value, ethics is objective. To me, the skepticism comes in the ethics. When I take my morality, okay, or my views, and I actually try to, like a hypothesis, I try to actually test it and bring it out into the world. And that's where it transfers into ethics. And then the skepticism with the ethics is absolutely there. It is going how did this align and actually work in the real world? And then it comes back to me, is the idea how I observe, if my morals, did approximate, or if they, were false. And then based on that, I revitalize, my morality as I bring it back, so that when I say I'm not morally skeptic because the morals are assumed. I have to just bring them up out of anywhere. If I questioned them, eventually I would just get down to because I say so is the thing. So skepticism wouldn't work 100% time on this. It would fail if I tried to do it. However, as I bring those values out into the world, I absolutely can question this because it's not based on assumptions anymore. It's based on observations. And you can question observations all goddamn day if you want to.
Do you derive your values from experience, or first you try to come up with some theory and then test it out in the real world?
This would be like the question from our last conversation on discovery versus invention, which I would say yes, both those are the case.
Both true. Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Let's get to applied ethics.
Yeah.
Let's take some field which is probably close to you, like anything.
Engineering, ethics of engineering.
Okay.
So I've dealt with people in this field before. So the idea is engineering deals very heavily with creating either technologies or various structures that can make people's lives better or can help them with daily lives and everything like this. And the thing about engineering is a lot of times they know they can do something. They know they have the abilities, tools, and anything to do things. The ethics comes in where it's like, but ought we to do that thing is the thing. We have the ability, but ought to do it. So an example of this would be like, let's talk about, I guess, it'd be an engineer who's working, on a project to build a freeway, okay? To build a freeway or a construction that's working with a construction service to build a freeway. And the freeway is going to go through a bunch of like houses and stuff like that and get rid of their houses in its project. Now, they know they have the materials, they have the know-how, they can make this work. But just because they can do these things, ought they to do this thing? Because I would look and I'd say, well, you're running all those people, those ends in themselves, those personhoods out of their house and actively making their lives worse for your own benefit. You're getting paid for this or something like this. And I'm looking, I'm like, can you honestly say that for all or for your other observed instances or stuff like that, is this something that you'd be okay with someone doing to you or doing to someone you care about, running them out just because they can or anything like that? A lot of people go, well, no, not really. And usually the argument that comes after that, though, is like, but I have a job, I have a boss, I have orders to follow or something like that. And I look and it's like, if following these orders means you have to completely negate your moral conscience, everything about it, to go through with it, just for some, benefit, or just to say you follow the orders, you are pretty much completely denying your rationality. It's a banality of evil. It's, the classic example of this in the term I just used was Hannah Arendt talking about Nazi soldiers during the Second World War. Their defense in the Nuremberg trials was, I was following orders. I can't be held guilty. So, and her thing was like, this is freaking absurd. Just because you followed orders, you are not a cog. You are a human being. You have a conscience. You can't just turn that off, willy-nilly when it suits you. So this would be a case where, I would say, as a firm that lives in this community and is part of it, you ought to consider past your ability, ethically, as you bring this into the world, your application of this freeway through these houses or something like that. And I would say you can't do it. That'd be applied. So I don't know if that answers your question. Or
yeah, I guess I can understand it, but as far as I know, it's very hard to find. Well, maybe in America it's a little bit better, but
in America, this is like an infamous thing that happens, especially if you live on the West Coast.
Yeah, usually people like workers who just build certain things. They're not rational. I would call them rational beings.
Oh, I know.
Who can think and analyze such problems, who prefer just basically, as you say, follow the authority, follow the orders.
Yeah, and they've never considered. They're kind of just going through the motions.
then excuse themselves by saying, okay, I'm just
I'm just following. I'm just a cog. And
yeah, I probably did lots of like in my teens, in my teens and in my early 20s, I did lots of things of that sort. I mean, not
Yeah.
just following orders, but not thinking at all. Like, okay, this is what benefits me. I'm going to do that, and I don't care about anybody else, because this is like the way how I was raised up, and just simple childish logic.
And usually you're fine with that until someone, does that to you, or like turns it on you. And you realize, holy shit, this is horrible.
you excuse everything, yeah. But in my, like, what changed my mind, I basically read, as I mentioned earlier, this guy Slavkov-Shchedrin, and he was he wrote a satire, and I read 10 volumes, and I found, and he was basically making like fun of, not fun, but he tried to criticize through using laugh and humor, like social behavior of his time. And it was 80s, 50s, 80s, 60s, 80s, 70s. And I found myself almost in every his character. Like he was basically developing a character. It's the stupidest character, but he like shows this character as if, like, he makes him talk about politics, about morality, about anything, and shows how stupid this character is. And then I read the book, and wow, this is me, and I like doing all this. And then the next book, and finally, I guess I got so much like shame and guilt after reading these books, and it changed. It helped me to figure out what was going on. But usually people do not read too much.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this goes back to our last talk on what is wisdom again. I would say the fact that you are realizing that, looking back and going, man, I was stupid, or like, oh God, or you're that kind of shame. That's a good, I think that's a good thing. I look and I say, that's one of the best signs you can have, is that constantly looking. When you look back and you don't feel that anymore, where you just feel like, no, I'm great consistently. And this would be like a worker, kind of the workers that we're talking about, where they just, stagnate and don't engage it critically at all, or not just a worker, it could be anybody. The thing where they just look back and they always, just have that consistent of great, of no questioning. I look at it like, chances are you're not great. It's just that you've never engaged this. You've never tried it. And honestly, that's where I point like, and the fault of that is square on you. You cannot give that fault up. So
do you believe that we are evolving in terms of like becoming more conscious on a social level?
I'd say historically it does seem that way. I don't know. A lot of people, there are people who would argue that there are actual biological changes, like advancements to our limbic system, in our brain, that actually correlate to our advancement. I'm not talking about that so much. I'm just talking about, like, if I look at advancements of government from, like, say, divine law theory to the current, idea that we have, mainly of liberal or representative governments, I look and I'd say, yeah, there's a ton of progress that's being made here. Here are two exact instances, and I can definitely say I prefer this instant, or I can see a bunch of change from this instance to this instance, and a bunch of things that went into it.
But people in general, like, for example, I've read lots of philosophy, and quite a lot of them just try that people are hopeless. And it's not only them, Schopenhauer or.
Well, we before this started, we were talking about Russia, and Russia back in the 19th, in the 19th century had a huge illiteracy rate. Like, I forget what it was. It was something like 90% of the population couldn't read or write.
Yeah.
And if I would look in academic terms, now the way that they achieved this is absolutely horrifying. But if you look at it today, it has one of the highest literacy rates out there. It's insane. That being said, like I said, the way they achieved it is horrifying. I don't know if I want to emulate this. Let's talk about Sweden. Sweden, same problem. If we look back to, it wasn't as bad as Russia, but it was still fairly low. You look at it today, you have a very high literacy rate. And I would say this is an academic area where I could look at a meta-analysis and be specific enough to say, yeah, they have progressed in this sense, rationality. Because I do think because I got into this a little bit on our last conversation, that grammar or literacy goes hand in hand with logic.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about here,
Mhm.
it does go hand in hand. And if you can, reading is a process of, painting pictures or understanding or being able to contemplate and continuous coherently hold stories, or, I see equations, constant equations that are being consistent. It is in many ways making you more logical, more rational. It does do that. That being said, there are terrible writers who are inconsistent, and I actually think you do get dumber by reading them. But in many cases, it does make you better.
Okay.
Not true for all cases.
Okay. We also have descriptive ethics, which is, I suppose, like comparing moralities of different people.
Yep.
And
Uh,
not prescribing certain actions, but basically analyzing.
Yeah, I mean,
why different people choose to believe in this or that, or evaluate certain things over the others.
Okay. And I would look at that and I would say, there can, I'm never going to say there's a problem with analyzing or approaching something with a method of just trying to break it down and understanding it. And this is true of ethics and going to morality or anything. The problem, once again, that I have with descriptive ethics is when we break it down, you remember what I said about value and morality, I'm going to look and I'm like, eventually you're just going to get to an assumption. You're going to get to an area where a person just goes, I like it because I like it. And the example I used over and over was aesthetics, art pieces or anything where, abstract pieces where we can apply metrics for people to explain why people like things. But the truth of the fact of the matter is the person likes the thing because they like it. It's very simple. And the problem
is there something in the person, or is there something in a thing? Or again,
is there, I would say it's in the person for me. It's extrinsic, not intrinsic, is what I'm saying. That isn't to say we can't, because we do. Notice that a group or a large percentage of people find things useful and they gravitate towards things for certain reasons. People gravitate towards, in the West, using forks and knives because they find them useful to eat,
yeah,
food.
in Chinese it with
chopsticks, or in Eastern cultures. But the thing is, like I said with normative ethics, in this case, I can say it's inherently so. When I say something is inherent, it's necessarily so. That translates to the same thing as saying all instances, this is valid. And we have the same problem again, where one person points out a thing where they say no, and that's a proper refutation of that. That would be logical in the same system. I identify one instance, that whole entire thing falls apart.
So does it mean that there's no intrinsic values in things?
I would say my argument is yes, there is no intrinsic value. This would be full on like the existentialist absurdity, the idea of the absurd, finding meaning in a meaningless universe. And I can actually mathematically express. Are you okay if I erase stuff up here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'll just erase what I don't care for. You can go away. I can rewrite you. You're easy. Yeah, I can get all that from that. Okay, so there's a problem, a mathematical problem that I use to express what's known in philosophy as the absurd, the idea of the absurd, which is finding meaning in a meaningless universe, right? And it's really cool because I'm linking mathematics, computer science with philosophy when I do this. And what it is like, I go, okay, suppose you have an infinite number of shoe boxes, okay? Infinite number of shoe boxes. Let's go. And those three dots just means it goes on until infinity, okay? And I go, okay, that's neat. And suppose in each of these shoe boxes, there's a left shoe and there's a right shoe. So it goes, oh, okay, that's very easy. All right. And I go, simple, not that hard, nothing hard about it. And then I go, and suppose on each of these shoe boxes is a countable natural number, we've paired it. That's another mathematical problem for another time, but just say that on each one it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up, through a full and infinite set. And I go, okay, is there any possible way I can make an algorithm or a mathematical expression where I would be able to divide the right and left shoes into their own sets of infinity? Now, a lot of people are getting lost at this point, and I apologize. There is, I'll just show you. And we can go, yeah, and we'll go for all left shoes. For all left shoes, we can go, we will apply 2n plus 1. And for all
It's like Hilbert
Hotel, you got it, you know it. Good. 2n. So yeah, this is how you solve it. And what basically happens is n here is the number on the box, okay? And if it's a left shoe, it gets 2n plus 1. So 2 times 1 equals 2 plus 1 equals 3. And then for the right shoe, it gets 2n. So 2 times 1 is 2. And now they each have their own box. And I could do this forever with no problems. Now, here's where we actually get into the problem of the absurd and how I show it mathematically. Is I go, okay, it's super easy, right? But I'm gonna throw a little bit of curveball at you. I'm gonna say, what if instead of shoes, left and right shoes, we had socks inside the box? We had socks. Okay. Could I make the same problem work? And most people go like, well, it should work. It should work. Why wouldn't it work? What would go wrong? I'm like, actually, no, we couldn't make the same problem work. And they go, why? What's wrong? What's going on? And I go, can you distinguish with regular socks? Can you distinguish between a left and a right sock? Is there anything that distinguishes between them? That is to say, like when you buy a bag of the cheap socks, usually the left sock, the SO, and the right sock are identical. There's nothing that differentiates them. And I look and I go, so no, I wouldn't be able to use this because this works on me being able to differentiate between the left and the right. And I was like, if you plug this into a computer, you would get something that's known as mathematical exhaustion, because it would have to, for every single instance to infinity, discern between the socks on its own. It would have to make up the quality of left and right sock from nowhere. Are you starting to see how I'm connecting this to the absurd? So I'm basically saying we are pretty much, for this instance of morality, identical to, an algorithm or an expression trying to pair the socks, because there's no inherent quality of left or right sock. We have to just arbitrarily go, that's the left one, that's the right one, and do it again. And there is no way you can ever complete this. You will be doing it until you die. That's what it is. So
yeah, but still we may get back to certain categories. Categories, and a lot of people try to do that, say, oh, okay, if you want to have a successful life, you have to do this. This is the most valuable thing. And then like success is one criteria, then longevity another criteria, then, being intelligent, the third criteria. And everybody tries to come up with certain set of values. But inherently, as you say, there's no intrinsic values. We just choose them. No, that's
you're
random,
choosing your socks. You're choosing your socks, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I see.
The thing is, you will have groupings of people that have certain types of virtues, virtue ethics. I'm literally talking about that. We have certain, values that people sometimes, gravitate towards, like temperance, classic Stoic. I'll just put down temp.
Prudence, temperance.
The classic one.
Fortitude, justice.
And they'll look and they'll say, oh man, look at this giant grouping. Look at this giant grouping of all these people who do temperance and they feel good. And the thing is, I look at that and you always have this is temperance. People who have, are temperate, the existence of X, or people that have the quality of F of X, where X is temperance, and, so yeah, that won't be there, and G of X. And they're also doing good. G is the quality that they're also having a good life. They're, so in this area, we're saying, there's a correlation between them, being temperate and having a good life. But then, once again, there'll be that small circle outside where you have people being temperate, XX, F of X, and we'll say H of X, who happen to be trying to be temperate, and they're having a bad life. It happens, and we look and we go, well, if there exists people that are doing this and also have it, then I cannot put this up to an all, because it will negate it. Or, I'm sorry, it wouldn't be H, it'd be not G. Not G.
Yeah, but see, they identify temperance with good life. Like
yeah, we were talking about identity. You remember identity there, where I say you can just reduce it down to the same thing. And at that point, I'm like, it's not that this is mirroring anything in your thoughts or anything. You've just reduced it that this is the same thing as this. You're responding at anything. You're not even describing anything at this point. You just have two variables.
Yeah, it's yeah, I would agree that it's useless to generalize, but still you have your personal preferences, right?
I mean, yeah.
And
you have to assume something. You have to come up, if you don't come up with a value of which stock is, your feet are going to be cold.
Yeah, and then it's very tempting to like not teach other people, but basically in a conversation you share your values. You try to find people who are sharing the same values.
Well, you want to know why some people share your value, or why some people may have different values, because maybe it'll tell you something about your values or something like that. Maybe people who have been experiencing similar things learn things that you haven't grasped onto yet that could add to yours.
Yeah.
So that's great. I think that's fantastic. That's basically peer reviews across the board. Awesome. The problem is when you have people who have their values, and then they dictate, and these are the true values for all instances.
Then you have religion, then you have
you have a dogmatic
ideologies where people like choose a certain parameter and say this is the whole universe, this is how it must work, this is what we should do.
Yeah.
Nobody nobody has to criticize us.
Yeah. And that's the real problem with intrinsic value. When people say there are a thing, that is the case for all instances, is you kind of just disregard anything that doesn't agree with you. You just disregard it, and it's not falsifiable. It doesn't do anything. And I look and I go, now you have morality, but you've completely disconnected it from ethics. You're completely authoritarian. So this is the opposite problem of a utilitarian, consequential, or anything, which didn't have moral connection. Now you've emphasized morality with no chance for ethics. You completely knocked that out of the park. And are just saying it's right because I say it's right, and screw all the other ends in itself, and or because it fundamentally is. You won't need to take any areas. So we talked about the absurd. A great way to kind of know about that would be Sisyphus. If you ever read
I've read
the myth of Sisyphus, where it's kind of like you're pushing a rock up a hill, you don't know why you're doing it, and let's say there's another Sisyphus along you, and he's also pushing the rock, and they turn to you, maybe a she, and just goes, oh, I know why we're doing this, and this can be the only reason why we're doing it. And if you come up with any other reason, you're wrong. And you can believe what they're saying, but at what point do you realize they're doing the same thing as you, that they're similar to you? How would they have any more idea than that you do about what's going on or anything? Because they're in the exact same situation. They're like you in the same rational abilities, or seem to be. So why would they have any better idea about this than you would? And the answer is, I look at it like, they don't. There is no better idea than this or anything. So They're just
Well,
choosing their
well,
songs.
you may consider it as if, for example, when we are children, right, we are dependent on our parents.
Yeah.
And usually it's quite obvious for, like, when you grow up, you see that when you was a child, most of you, what you have been told was true. Like, and usually you like don't, at least in my experience, I didn't take it seriously. I tried to like do it. Like I tried to develop my own values from the very childhood. But yeah, the point is that certain, like, why other people may have may understand better the reason why we try to push this rock up the hill is like they have more experience. They have more.
To be clear, I am talking very specifically here about morality.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about empirical things such as science or like any other practices where experience would be in the area.
Yeah, but still,
absolutely do have experts in that field or authorities in that field who can say, I have evidence and all this thing. When I talk about morality, basically I'm going like, no, these are assumed values. I am very specifically not talking about ethics. I'm very specifically talking about.
So experience actually doesn't matter because we may rationalize.
Like if we go into ethics, this changes a bit. There are experts in ethics in those problems when we go into it. But when morality, where I'm just looking and realizing as a person, as an end in himself, I'm not saying you are, a plumber or an engineer or a politician or anything like. I'm just seeing you as a person, another person on the area to value. And I'm going, why would this person have any more idea of value than I do, given, because I'm not talking about experience, just as a rationality, we are similar, we are analogous, and that's where the argument comes in. Well, there wouldn't be any other difference. It'd be just as valid as your morality.
So the point is to differentiate between ethics and morality, not mix them up.
Yeah, this is why I put so much emphasis on that.
Let's do some blitz on
okay.
And the values are like, for example, knowledge. What is the most valuable knowledge for you?
The most valuable knowledge for me, I guess it would depend on how we define knowledge, but as I define knowledge, I do see knowledge as something that is inherently practical, which I will say the most valuable type of knowledge is that which is obtained through continuous skeptical applications. I'm talking about the scientific method. Let me say.
I'm gonna give you some examples, like how the things which I like wrote down when I was thinking about this. So, for example, death, that we are mortal, is for me a valuable knowledge. Then determinism, then the idea of time or change, so that all things are changing, and being aware of it, like not taking everything as stagnant or as.
So just some things that are valuable to me.
Then energy. So the knowledge how to, for example, food or exercise, how to get energy for life. And well, the knowledge of your environment, the knowledge of your own ignorance and limitations. So that's basically like things which, when I was thinking about this question, I just wrote down.
All right. So the things that I value,
and it's
I value
like
that I'm alive. That's a big thing.
Yeah, but it's not knowledge. No, it's not knowledge. We're talking about like knowledge.
Oh, I don't have knowledge that I'm alive.
Okay. You're saying like it's knowledge that you're alive, so you're aware that you're alive.
I am. I can say that I am.
You're not dead. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I value that. I brought it up. I value skepticism very highly.
Yeah, but it's not. No, it's actually not knowledge. It's method or
that's
skill.
The problem, because skepticism means lack of knowledge, but I value it. Okay, so we'll throw that out. I value. I value. How do I want to say this? I value wonder and inspiration. Okay, the idea of creation and motivation. I value that very highly. I value the drive to understand things. This will take the place of kind of skepticism. The drive to understand and grasp things. For I said I value that I am. I'm kind of getting everything like I value sleep. I value eating, things that are essential for me continuing being are under kind of that umbrella. So if people are wondering why those things are gone, I value interactions with certain other ends in themselves, would say intelligent conversations. I value that very highly. And I do value working out my health, but once again, I'm kind of putting that down at the just umbrella term M, although that's not necessarily part of it. That's kind of like the fitness of the body, where I'm putting out the fitness of the mind. So I'll put that in its own thing. I do value fitness and staying in shape, being healthy.
I actually wanted to like to divide it in several categories. So it's like knowledge, behavior, skills, virtues, tools, and stuff. But you basically you put you took items from each category and basically already like.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that's what we
did. That's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
So some intrinsic, extrinsic value we already got through it. So there's no intrinsic value in your opinion. And then therefore there's no there we can talk about monism and pluralism, right? There's discussion.
I kind of if you want to talk about our last conversation, I really attacked like reductive materialism and physicalism, which I would also say in many ways is an attack on monism. In many ways it can go, or the idea that everything can be explained through like one theory. When somebody looks at that, well, some people look at reductionism as breaking things down, but the way that I want to say that I'm attacking it is when people like we witness an occurrence like lightning, okay? And someone comes up when you say, oh, that's the flash, the thunder, all those experiences, and someone comes up to you and they go, well, really? Lightning's just the discharge of electron static, I'm butchering this, in the atmosphere. But the thing that I look and I go like, yeah, but I'm not talking about what, the description of what the physical activity is. I'm talking about, how it seems to me, my experience of it is the thing that I'm talking about. We have two different subject matters here.
It's a certain quality, as they call it.
Yeah. So this kind of comes back. This is also an attack on monism, because a lot of monism is like, oh, everything can be explained through one theory or one thing. And I'd walk up and be like, it could be, but would you want to do that? And would that help you understand what's going on, both for like individual or, on a factual basis or anything? And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of monism. I don't like it.
Okay.
I would be in the pluralism group, which isn't to say, I said I was a property dualist last time, and pluralism, people usually hear those words and they say, oh, I'm saying everything's made out of two. There are two substances. And the thing that I really want to say is like, it's not that there are two substances. There is at least two. There could be 3, 4, infinite. I don't fucking care. I just know that I can't describe everything through one. If I try to do that, I lose some aspects of the understanding. And so I don't do that.
So it doesn't matter whether it's physical or consciousness or...
All that matters to me is that I can apply a type of rational, either as it's an approximation model or as it's an abstract theorem. I can apply something that I can consistently represent and grasp the subject matter. And if physicalism has me doing it through physics or any different sciences, great, it applies to that. But it comes up short when I deal with more abstract problems like pure mathematics, or when I deal with first-person problems like existential problems of belief, or when I deal with aesthetic problems or problems of art. And it goes like, if it's coming up short in these instances, then I'm going to use different, different ways of understanding things to move them forward. And therefore, I'm not using just one. Therefore, monism is out the window. So
okay.
that's the one.
Okay. So I have few more questions. It's actually not my questions. I took them from a guy named Richard. Wait, what was his name? Richard Joyce. So the book is called The End of Morality, and he is, I guess he's a moral nihilist.
Okay.
I haven't read the book, but I just read the preview to see what's going on. So the first question is it true that the more that people are motivated by moral concerns, the more likely it is that society will be elitist, authoritarian, and dishonest?
Okay. I believe that's not true in the slightest. I would say as we look at history now, I'd say as we look at history as evidence or example, we actually see very much so the opposite happening. I brought up earlier our discussion of divine law theory moving into a liberal government and everything. And from, as I defined, the connection between morality and ethics, I said it was essential in a representative or liberal government for it to consider these things. And to me, for us to move away from authoritarianism or elitism, I actually wrote down an answer for this, which is, if we look at the rise and fall of divine law theory and the tolerance of liberalism, along with the rise in intellectualism that people consider their own morals, their own subjective values, that is to say, leads to humility and honesty. They can be wrong through their actions as they can consider it, and as well, they can be wrong through, and the fall of authoritarianism as people don't look to singular rulers, divine law theory, someone who is literally saying, I'm right because God told me that is right and I am always right. That's where the authoritarianism, because people consider the values for themselves and consider the governments as representatives of themselves. So that'd be my refutation of it. So.
Okay, is an appeal to moral values a useful tool for helping resolve conflicts, or does it actually exacerbate conflicts?
Yes.
Exacerbate?
No, it does both. It can possibly do both. I would say this is a false dichotomy. So basically my response to this, it can possibly, and in past instances as it has happened, necessarily do both. I mean, as morality is very much assumed, as we defined it back here, if you remember that, it just comes about, it can create conflict due to the ultimate lack of justification. We talked about with tolerance and societies and people and everything, because we just assume it, it's not based off observation. You have just as much justification for your morality as I do. And this can often create problems. However, there is still plenty of instances where people see similarities or tolerate differences. We talked about this with categories and areas that actually causes them to group together into those communities and everything. Differences that allow for the formations of societies and justice systems that I would say, that morality plays an essential role in its coherence and continuing going, that they can have a combined goal to keep striving for. So that would kind of be my refutation to that.
Okay, so
the idea, can it conflict or can it help? I'm saying it can do both. Here's how it can do both. So
depending on the context and
how we apply it and observe it.
Yeah, okay. Would it even be possible to abolish morality from our thinking?
My response to this was, morality can be abolished in an abstract sense. We kind of got at this with identity, where I reduced it all the way down to just a variable. And it's kind of to the point where, because there's nothing about X, there's no quality of X, there's nothing to sense. Technically, there's no morality as I defined it. There's no value to it, anything. It just exists. Okay. By saying X for all instances, it doesn't have a qualia or anything. It's just X. Or any particular, though in a practical sense, it may help to mitigate the objective science when we try to take people's bias and stuff out through the scientific method. That would be my instance. but it still plays a very important role in how we shape and live in the world, and as how we apply that science or that technology. When I was talking about engineers and the freeway going through there, that you still would want to consider morality and ethics in those areas. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you ought to do something. So that'd be kind of my reply to that. So yes, it does have a place in today's world. We can abstract it at a, take it out at a very abstract level, but the minute that we try to apply that abstract level, it comes back in, because you are a moral person amongst other moral people in the world, whether you like it or not, whether you have morals that or value it or not.
Yeah, but as I understand it, the problem is that once again, people who have power, they basically define morals, and they claim us, God said us that we're right, and that's why you should follow our rules.
See, my entire criticism of divine law theory to the liberalism in the area, and bringing historic, where I'm basically saying that did exist, that was the case. We've been moving away from that for a really long time, thanks to the work. I mean, there still are instances, but thanks to the work a lot in academia, as well as philosophical jurisprudence, like Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, a lot of theorists that took away the power, what people in academia love to refer to as power structures that dictate everything. They're talking about governments with divine law theories and authoritarianism. And I'm basically looking, I was like, but you've seen historically that these structures almost always meet, usually with revolutions. You have uprisings because people just get sick of this shit and won't take it anymore. Or you see that these governments, other liberal governments, or that are around them, those people start flocking to them. So that government starts losing population. They can't sustain themselves economically, or maybe because other governments are liberal, their morals don't align with the authoritarian governments. They just don't want to deal with them. They kind of close them off and everything, and they slowly start. We've kind of seen that happen throughout the ages. And the thing that I want to get at, hold on, but the idea that people go, morality is just power structures. And I look and I go, that's absurd. I can come up with morality. Morality is assumed. Power, as many people define it, usually in a Nietzschean sense, which is an expression of that other area, is indicative of morality, but it isn't morality. Anything. It's part of the ethic, is what I would say by these definitions. We're inferring it. So I can value things and not express it, not act on it. I do this all the damn time. And I'm sure you do. So
well, probably everybody does.
I mean, at least as I see you as an ends in yourself, or another person, a personhood, I'm assuming you're doing it, so I mean, that would be my refutation on top of the other refutation.
So do you know about a moral error theory?
Yes.
Like, if we were to accept a moral error theory, would it be feasible to carry on believing in morality in everyday context?
I mean, okay. If I understand my response to this, hold on, did I write? Okay, I did respond to this. My response to this basically was like, I think it exists in an abstract sense as I define it or assume it, morality in everyday context, regardless of error theory, or error theory deals with ethics as I defined it. It's, remember when I was talking about bringing forth the ethic and seeing if it's actually true out here? Well, error theory just says the morality is always false. It's really false from that area. And the thing that I look at it is like, well, it's not that it's false or that it's even true. It's just that it's assumed. It's not justified. Truth and false values, treating it like an assertion, a proposition or assertion, and propositional logic wouldn't be a proper representation of what's going on here. So I think what I put down is, I think in an abstract sense, as I define it, and the reason that follows, regardless of error theory, it exists in our everyday lives. Ultimately, both truth and false values of assertions are assumed via applications of binary. Most people don't know this, but propositional logic, when we put those little, true, false values underneath our truth tables or anything, that's just an application of binary. We're just saying, given these assertions, there are two possible outcomes for this assertion or this well-formed formula. It has nothing to do with the real world. We're just assuming these things so we can put it in understand it or valid context. So moving on, and can be shown to correspond to the objective world via testing similar to the scientific method. This is just, people considering their beliefs or morals as like a hypothesis. Their actions, the ethics, is like testing that hypothesis, bringing it out in the world and testing it, and then reflecting or bringing that information back in and reforming their beliefs, hypothesis, if it didn't align with the actual world, or as it did, they start building confidence like a scientific theory. They start building that up. So
yeah, but still they think like in terms either it's right or wrong, right? They don't think in terms like it's just assumed. So if it works in the real world, it's right. It's
well, that's the thing. When we assume that binary, that 1 and 0, that's not actually a proper representation of the real. That works off of something called the law of excluded middle, that it can only be right and it can only be wrong. A lot of times when we observe, and this deals with my determinism, when we bring things out inside the real world, it's not that it's what we said or it's not what we said. It's usually an alternative inference, something completely that we didn't even plan for that comes up about. Now, understand, if I'm using that 1 and 0, that excluded middle, and we came to this where if Aristotle's, you either are a philosopher or you're not a philosopher. It's the same inference. And I pointed out any alternative will be pushed to not a philosopher because it doesn't exactly line up to the one. And then I looked and I said, yeah, but that's not being practical. You're not representing the observation. So you need to consider the actual observed instance and not just how it aligns with your hypothesis. So it could be completely something alternative. Like I thought, I had the belief that pumpkin pie was good, okay? And the negation of this would be pumpkin pie is not good. And I go, to Thanksgiving in America, and I'm ready, I see all the pies out, but pumpkin pie wasn't even present. The only thing that was present was apple pie, all right? And I ate the apple pie and I came to the conclusion that apple pie is good. Now, apple pie is good has nothing to do with pumpkin pie is good or pumpkin pie is not good. It's a completely different alternative anything, but it could still be added to my theory that I can say pumpkin pie is good because I didn't get to test it. It's just going to stay there. But then I add in, another premise, and apple pie is good. That wouldn't be part of the other part of it. So error theory to me, there is truth in error theory. There are things I like about it. The only problem I have about it is treating your beliefs, your fundamental beliefs, as they have truth or false value. And I look and I go, that's absurd. And they're assumed. Truth or false value comes later.
They may be functional, they may be dysfunctional.
Yeah. Like, am I going to say true or false value to the painting being good? Is that what I'm going to apply? I don't know. This can also go into expressions. There was the next question you gave me. He uses the word utters in it, and in philosophical terms, analytical terms, we use a term called utterances. All right, and this specifically designates expressions that don't have truth or false value and don't have referential qualities. So they're very different from propositions or assertions. And they can be anything from niceties to explicits to when I say, damn it, out loud like that. Where's the truth or false value to that? What is that referencing in the real world? Now, I actually believe, damn it, what I just said, and I'm expressing something. But where's the reference to the area? Or it has semantics. Where's the reference? Or where's the true false? It'd be absurd to try to take that off that area. I'm just performing an action. So
propositions and utterances, right? So utterances is basically you can say either it's true or false, whereas propositions you may assign certain
we assign usually true or false values, and we say it's referential.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. There's one more question.
okay.
There are actually three more, but I'd like to
Okay.
metaphorical. Yeah, I don't think that this one. Like we already got through it through the third. Let's just talk about feminism and environment, like in terms
Okay.
of their value.
I think that was the question on and moral theories help or hinder like current feminist ideologies.
Yeah.
And my response is you have to understand, I've studied some feminism. A lot of it's dated. It's second wave. Simone de Beauvoir is mainly my area where I've studied it.
Can you say it once again?
Simone de Beauvoir.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
She hooked up with Sartre.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've seen some lectures on her.
Yeah.
Like I haven't read her, but her books, but I know who you're talking about.
Okay.
She was like a friend of Sartre.
Yeah, she was one of the existentialists, and she wrote two notable books that I've read some of the Second Sex, which is that's the big second wave feminism book, and then she wrote On the Ethics of Ambiguity, which is actually my favorite existential book that I've ever read, which just deals about a lot of what I've talked about with morality, trying to move forward into ethics, and kind of how it's always kind of opaque in its application. But getting back to the feminist area, I'll deal with that first and then I'll get into climate. I just wrote down, depends on the feminists. I've read a fair amount of second wave feminism and would state that the system of value via principle 1 and 2. Principle 1 and 2 to me are odd implies can. Okay, if you remember me bringing that up. And what we talked about with personhood, which is just to say recognizing another as ends in themselves, as another person with rationality. And I think dealing with those two areas, that it does indeed support much of what they stood for, being seen, treated as equals that are capable of pursuing their own ends. And that being said, as with all movements, not just feminism, there are outliers that are extremists that kind of violate this area. Like with feminism, if we had a feminist who not only argued for equal treatment to women in society, but then would argue that men ought to be knocked down, or another class ought to be knocked down, page of like, no, you're violating the second principle of seeing others themselves, because you can argue, and I believe in many ways we've seen historically feminism, I will say many feminist movements to me are justified, that I have sufficient evidence that I can look and I can go, there are arguments here that I can see via evidence in historical events. Yes, you are justified in making these arguments for equality and treatment. Because let's say going in America back to 1940s, 1950s, we look at this era and we look and we go, yeah, women a lot of the time were just seen as housewives that were meant to bear children, take care of the house, and weren't given the opportunities, or was a lot harder for them to get out and be individuals who could pursue their own moral dreams and ideology. And I would say, yeah, in that case, that absolutely is a violation of the second principle, if you are a person that enforced that type of life or anything. But like I said, there are instances I can look and I can go, yep, morally, I can justify that through a value system or going anything. But there are always outliers that I'm looking to go, oh, not this person right here. I don't want to do a blanket statement and say I support all feminists and everything. I know there are those out there that I would go, oh, that person. Then I'd be cherry picking. I'd be making the problem I said, before, just to keep a generalized statement going. And then on climate change, was that good enough for you on feminism, or?
Sure.
Okay. On climate change, mainly the basis, if climate change has any moral basis or consideration that we need to take on it, or responsibility, I wrote down mainly the basis of trust in the second formulation, seeing others as end in themselves. That is, much like in game theory, we know that to get the best outcome, all of us must work toward in a certain way. We have a joint
Mhm.
understanding how other, if you remember when I was discussing justice and I said a lot of it is just me knowing how you're going to act and we're going to act towards the same thing instead of, and I take that as kind of like a compromise to me just acting on my morale. I kind of compromise a bit because I'm like, okay, I get that I'm not going to get exactly what I want because we need to work towards this greater goal. I can deal with that. That's what I'm talking about here. Must work in a certain way. And a lot of that comes down to us trusting other people, nations to do their part and to do what they say they're going to do. Motivated by the fact that this affects all of us as ends in ourselves. And we as ends in ourselves need to have morality and be that area. That is to say, if climate change as a problem could possibly result or necessarily, as many, scientists will tell you, will result in, the death of whole humanity, then I would look and I'm like, that is a moral obligation on every single person that's part of that set of everyone to make sure everybody else can keep going because they need to be morals and ends in themselves. So if you don't work towards that, you are indeed violating this area. So that would be kind of where I'd come up on it. So I'd say, yeah, you do have an obligation as individuals, as corporations, or whatever you want to take it to consider this. This would almost come back to the engineering thing where people would be like, yeah, but I have a job to do. I have things to take care of. And I'd be like, I understand that you have practical needs. I'm not a rich person. I make about $43,000 a year. I have a house. I understand I have needs, but what I can ask from each of you, because I understand not everyone has the ability to just buy Teslas and install windmills on the house. I can ask from you, from your ability, considering each of your circumstances and saying you can give or you can contribute some way to it until the point you realize that it's putting pressure on your ability to keep, your livelihood.
Yeah, at least you might just you might try to study and like to read something about it to understand whether it's true or no.
Something is better than nothing. Just trying to do something about it.
Yeah, I'd like. Okay, I want to say that I don't have a car, and this is my major contribution. Major contribution to to this field. But anyway.
But if you remember, because a lot of what I just talked about, if you remember, a huge one of the principles I bring up all the time is ought implies can. I talked about it a little bit here, and what you'll see a lot of times is you'll see people, rich people who drive around Teslas or eco-friendly cars, go up to somebody like me who drives. It's not a gas guzzler. It's a Mitsubishi Lancer, a sedan that gets about 34 miles to the gallon, and they'll point at me and be like, oh, you ought to buy a Tesla or something. You ought to be more concerned. And the thing that I'll look at them is like, how can I do that? How can I buy a Tesla or any of that stuff? I make $43,000 a year and that car costs $40,000. So that'd be an entire year's salary. It's entirely not practical for a person like me to do this. Not to mention the fact that I would also look and say, you realize if I do this, I'm also going to be, either junking or selling the car that I'm currently driving. So that'll still be contributing to the carbon footprint instead of me just sitting and using the same car and not, contributing to building a car that would otherwise not need to be built, which also would contribute to the carbon footprint. There are other things to it, but that would just be my take.
Okay, I'd like to ask about books, some books recommendations on ethics and morality and our topic in general. Like I would hear probably 3-5 books and some descriptions, like short descriptions, why these books exactly.
Okay, well, one that I brought up last time that I think is very important that everyone takes a look at is it's fairly short. Kant's Grounding of the Metaphysics of Morals. It's a big one I bring up right away. A lot of the stuff you see me expressing here, and you will see, because Kant's kind of the link between analytical and continental philosophy traditions. He's kind of where they diverge, where they come together and everything. And if you're going to understand contemporary as well as classical philosophers, I really recommend reading his book. It deals mainly with, rigorous and rational concepts, him really trying to ground things as clearly as he can. And it can be hard to understand at times, but if you take your time, it's only like 50 pages. It's not that long. Take your time, work it, wade through it. It will help you understand so much about what's being done in this field. It will literally shed light on anything. Another thing that I bring up, an easier read, that a lot of people kind of look past is Plato's Euthyphro, which is one of the dialogues. Euthyphro is the dialogue he has with a son that's prosecuting his father on the steps of a courthouse, is where he has the conversation. And it's basically Plato's Socrates trying to discern what is right. How do we know, and how do we know what is right? He calls it piety and impiety, which is how he refers to it. And it gives you so much insight to like the beginning of ethics and like where it comes from in Western traditions, and really helps you start understanding, you're going to get things. Third book I'm going to recommend is, Aristotle's Ethics, because of course I'm going to freaking recommend that book. But it helps you understand the transition into Aristotle's Ethics.
Yeah, I've read that recently.
Yeah.
Nicomachean Ethics.
Yeah. I mean, that's on everyone's list. You're gonna study value. You're gonna study Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.
Tell us what were the other concepts? Nature.
Oh, there's tons.
Eudaimonia.
Oh, eudaimonia, the continuous pursuit of flourishing.
But it's like it's not happiness, right? It's some kind of
it's flourishing, as I understand,
it's living philosophy, like virtuous life.
Yeah, you're pursuing and questioning and kind of
discovering your nature. Yeah. And your telos, and living according to this nature and this telos.
Yes, but there's so much in the community. There's chapter 8, which deals with the types of friendship, which deals with a lot of the things I was talking about.
At the end. It's at the end. I remember
having friends for utility versus having friends for the sake of just having friends. You have the golden mean, the ideas of how values that we see as like negations or opposites of one another can kind of be understood in certain contexts to come to like a synthesized like idea of each of the values, and a lot of other great insert. That's like, if I was rating all these books, this would probably be the number one on the list. That's like, yep, you're going to be reading this book and there's no way around it. Another book that I'd recommend, kind of because I feel like if you're going to deal with value and the idea of going from, because a lot of these early philosophers deal with intrinsic value. Essentialism was very much still the area. I would say
I guess it's at the core of Platonic, Platonic forms. Like good in itself was the first concept.
And you really, and if you can't, I've already said that all my value is extrinsic. So I'm gonna say you ought to read one of the existentialists. It'd probably be Mythicists by Camus. It'd probably be that. It'd either be that, or you can substitute Ethics of Ambiguity by Vidmar. It's either of those two books. Both are really short, easy reads. I mean, the most powerful of these is a read by Sartre, but that's a bit heavy. Let's just stick to these two. They're a little bit simpler. Let's not go too far into them. So I probably, the problem that I put up here with the socks being sorted out and dealing with the absurd, that's Camus all day. That's everything the mythicist deals with, and realizing other people as ends in themselves have as much, argument to value as you do. And then Vidmar's Ethics of Ambiguity will help you kind of, if you read them both, will help you kind of understand why I separate, and you'll also understand why Kant separated ethics and morality, and kind of putting those morals authentically into practice, and how that kind of starts coming about. And then, okay, I did a lot of those, and I want to get one book on jurisprudence or political philosophy, because we've done ethics, we've done morality. I really want to get into political philosophy and do that. So if I could recommend one book for political philosophy. Ooh, I'm going to say, okay, I'm not going to say the whole book because that'd be cruel. I'm going to say Hobbes's Leviathan, and specifically the first two sections, okay? The first two sections, known as On Man and On Commonwealth, okay? I'm not saying the whole thing because the whole book's like 700 pages and it is a super dense read. The first two sections, I think, is like 200 pages. So it's still a bit of a trek, but it's super worth it. You will see the entire formation of contractarianism, you know, that can follow into utilitarianism and consequentialism, really with dealing with ethics and value on a large scale, a government scale is what it's trying to do. And this does it from the best because Hobbes only makes one assumption to follow all of his reasoning, and that is life is inherently valuable. That's his only intrinsic value, is that life. And his argument is very simple, because we need to be, you heard me make this argument, we need to be in order to, you know, be capable of arguing value. Now, I differentiate with this some area because of tolerance, because there are those who, if we allowed to be, their expression of value would literally, you know, end up in killing or snuffing out other people's value. I would go back in time and kill baby Hitler. That's what I'm saying. If it was to be like a singular timeline, I totally would do it. But Hobbes is important because you get to see of a very simple assumption the entire making of the basis of the social contract and everything that would influence modern government being made to encapsulate values, laws, how to enforce them, how to distribute them. Everything gets covered in that area.
I remember I've read it, but it was like a long time ago, and I basically skipped through it. I mean, I read 2 volumes of Hobbes, and it was very fast, probably in 2 weeks. I basically just was reading mindlessly without trying to analyze anything, just to get familiar with the language. And simultaneously, I was reading Montesquieu, and he had an interesting book, the Spirit of Law, or the I guess like I'm just translating from Russian title. In Russian it was "О духе законов," and also another Montesquieu's book was the reasons of rising and falling of Roman Empire. They like I remember just was one. I was studying as a lawyer, and I got through most of these political books. Also Machiavelli.
Yep, I was just about to bring them up.
Yeah.
You said the rise and fall. Did you ever read Machiavelli's discourses on the?
No, I just read the principle, and once again, it's just most of what I read, it was just skipping through these books, not analyzing them in detail. It's like to read as fast as possible. As many volumes as possible of one particular philosopher. Yeah, just to get to upload certain, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just stopped and could analyze maybe 1-2 paragraphs, but mostly it was like a book in a few days, in 2, 3, 4 days, like 200 pages a day. Basically reading 10 hours and doing nothing, just reading exercise.
That sounds painful.
Well, I enjoy it.
Yeah. I consider myself a pretty heavy, and I have done marathons like that, though with age I've kind of realized, and what you probably kind of realized, is those marathons, you know, where I'm just consuming all of that and not actually retaining that
exactly.
information.
So
I've kind of learned with age that, you know, that's not worth it. Don't even bother with that shit. You know, take it. You know, it's much better to take your time, do like 10 pages a day, and really take the time to understand them. You know,
well, some books, of course, you can read.
Some you can. But Platonic dialogues, I can do that. I can through those without any problem. They're super easy readings. And that I was actually gonna give a caveat to people, because Hobbes is hard. I'm not gonna lie, that's super hard. If you can't do Hobbes, or you're finding you're zoning yourself out, read Machiavelli's Prince. There's a substitution. Read Machiavelli's Prince. That's an easy substitution. It's not going to give you as much as Hobbes. You're not going to get anywhere near, but it will get you. Machiavelli kind of lays down the groundwork that Hobbes and Montesquieu did too, that Hobbes was able to build off of and basically make the Leviathan. So if you can't do this, you can't bring yourself to do this, at least do this, is what I'm saying. So I understand.
Okay. So Frank, thank you so much for
No problem.
for conversation. That was really fun.
Okay.
I enjoyed. I hope
glad.
in the future we can do more, probably taking
Okay.
some metaphysics or aesthetics and
We
diving
could do,
into-
I think usually after doing axiology, usually the best thing to get into is usually epistemology.
epistemology. Yeah, sure. I guess we may just, in a month or
Yeah.
something like that.
Take your
Okay.
time.
Okay. Thank you for conversation. I have to end
Yep.
here.
Thanks for having me. And I'll see you later.
Okay.